live.
Awesome.
Hey. So we should be live now. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to see so many people here. Welcome to the 48th edition of Sofia Crypto Meetup. Today we'll be talking about blockchain interoperability as requested in the group. And actually, we will ask you guys again next month what would be your topic of choice. So I guess the halving will be a big topic, but let's not distract and go into the into the actual event. So as usual, we'll be starting with the biggest news from April, again as voted in the group. And for this, we have Anastasia, who is a moderator of our Sofia Crypto Meetup group in Facebook and in general, our Sofia Crypto Meetup event. And she has a presentation for you guys. Anastasia, you can share your screen.
Hey everyone. So I'm starting with the biggest news. Those are the ones that are our community has voted on, the top 3. Of course, like the news of today is BTC surpassing the mark of $8,000. But let's see what our community has voted on. Just let me share the screen. So our topic today is blockchain interoperability with our guest of honor, Billy Rennekamp. And let's start first with the headlines. The poll showed those 3. Let's start with the first one. So central banks recommended to ban stablecoins, are recommended to ban. On the 14th of April, the Financial Stability Board, FSB, released a document addressing the regulatory, supervisory, and oversight challenges raised by global stablecoin arrangements. So in the document, there are outlined 10 recommendations to central banks for regulating stablecoins, including outright prohibition. So the FSB actually is an international entity that provides high-level suggestions on the global financial system at jurisdictional level. It comprises central banks and finance ministries from the major G20 economies. The recommendations are presented before an audience of G20 countries and reference major stable coins including USDT, USDC, TUSD, PAX, and DAI. The document suggests to authorities that if they can't control and regulate fully decentralized stablecoins, they should consider banning them, while in the same time pushing for heavy-duty regulations of centralized, privately issued global stablecoins. The problem is here that since the market is seriously relying on stablecoins, a ban like this could have serious consequences for Bitcoin and the broader cryptocurrency market. Generally, the document is consultative and is free to download if anyone is interested. News number 2, Binance acquired CoinMarketCap. On the 23rd of March, Binance have officially announced its purchase of the popular data site CoinMarketCap for an undisclosed sum, reportedly up to $4 million in cash and share deal. The news raised some discussions on the reasons behind the acquisition. So generally looking at Binance's activity since the beginning of the year, the exchange is expanding the range of products and consolidating a bigger market share. Binance ecosystem has also launched a crypto-backed Binance credit card in association with Visa. It has plans for a blockchain research institute in China, a 50 million fund with Wazir X called Blockchain for India to incubate and invest in blockchain projects and startups and so on. So there were also concerns raised over the potential conflict of interest here. However, according to CZ, the domain will remain independent from Binance and their holding company. It has also been stated that CoinMarketCap and Binance are separate entities that maintain a strict policy of independence from one another. Binance has no bearing on CoinMarketCap rankings, while CoinMarketCap has no influence over Binance's operations. News number 3. 11 class action lawsuits were filed against major crypto companies. The lawsuits were filed against 42 defendants, including Binance, BitMEX, Tron Foundation, and other major crypto companies from more than a dozen countries. The lawsuits focus on the selling of cryptocurrency tokens, which are claimed to be unregistered securities. The law firm filing the lawsuits, I hope I pronounced it right, Roche Cyrulnik Friedman, is famous for being behind the Bitfinex market manipulation suit in October 2019. Also, the firm represented the claimant estate in the suit against the self-professed Bitcoin investor Craig Wright. So that's how we have heard about it already. The news was first spotted by the website Offshore Alert, who called it its own crypto's Red Wedding, with reference to the Game of Thrones. So that's with the news. Now Vlad will go through the market.
Yes, you can keep actually. Please keep
sorry.
Yeah, you can keep the slide there. It's this graph that we are sharing each time that represents a day of our meetup since 2016, and you can see how the Bitcoin price progressed through that time. Actually, if you have heard of what is USD Bitcoin price averaging, yeah, you can see that if you use the day of the meetup as the day to purchase some Bitcoin, yeah, the price of Bitcoin wouldn't have been that volatile. Of course, super volatile after, yeah, was it June 2017? But generally, yeah, Bitcoin price averaging is a good long-term strategy to accumulate Bitcoins. And as you can see, for the first time, like in 2016, you would have, yeah, if you have bought a certain amount of Bitcoin in the beginning, it would have, yeah, its value would have multiplied significantly after. And another thing to notice is that on, again, what is it, like April 2019, like the top point that we have on the graph is actually not the top point of the price, which reached actually in that period almost $20,000. So I think it was like cost dollar averaging for Bitcoin. It was the right term. I'm not sure, but it's generally the best strategy to accumulate Bitcoin. And now you can see this little blip on the at the end for today. Bitcoin really went up significantly. I think about like 5 or 6% for the day, and kind of erased any losses caused by Black Thursday, which was yeah, last month. And people are very I think they are very into Bitcoin now, in terms are very optimistic about the price, at least up to the halving. And the halving is scheduled to take place on May 12th. Well, it could vary a little bit depending on, yeah, how quickly the blocks are found, but generally should be around May 12th, so about 12 days up to it. And I'm thinking of yeah, inviting you all to join an online celebration regarding the halving. This Pompiano, if you have heard of him, he was in Bulgaria actually. He announced that he's organizing an event, an online event, together with some other people. And I think it would be nice to join them and not actually organize our own event. I think it would be much funny, much more, yeah, funny if or yeah, best if we join other people. And yeah, this is what's happening with the price. I can feel a lot of FOMO currently in the markets. I'm of the opinion that there is nothing fundamental that has changed really in the value proposition of Bitcoin since yesterday for this price move to happen. I think it's primarily moved by the speculation and really the FOMO that is currently being generated. And I think there is a very good chance that that after the halving we can see a correction. So it's not clear how high the price of Bitcoin can go up to the halving. I can see people saying like anything from $9,000 to $12,000, $13,000. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. But I think once we go over the 9,000 range, I would say that that will be a range that is kind of overbought. But FOMO doesn't care about logic, and yeah, the halving is an event that happens only once every 4 years, and we have seen historically that the price has risen a little bit in some cases in the previous halvings, and I think in quite often, I think 3 out of 4 halvings it has gone down after the halving. So what I'm looking as indicators for where the price is going, I'm really not a good trader, but I'm trying to kind of learn at this point a bit more about what's happening and what to expect, because super interesting times now with COVID raging worldwide and the halving coming and financial markets also, yeah, doing some moves primarily up despite heavy unemployment rates worldwide. So is this like kind of a madness happening now? And it's so interesting to figure out like what is moving with what. And I'm of the opinion that currently Bitcoin is quite connected to yeah, classic financial markets, and we should be looking at those as well if you want to see where the price is going. Today, actually, I saw a very interesting tweet doing a comparison between this huge Bitcoin move and Nasdaq, and you can see a very close resemblance to what the two are doing. So yeah, I remain of the opinion that financial markets and Bitcoin are currently in this uncertain situation caused by COVID-19 quite correlated. But we'll see. I think up to the halving, it will be like a madness within a madness, like a Bitcoin specific madness. Everybody will be trying to possibly to up their position in Bitcoin just because yeah, everybody is expecting the price to rise at least up to the halving. So yeah, this was a kind of a longer commentary that I initially wanted to do, but these are my thoughts on what's happening. And congratulations again to anyone who has bought the bottom and is now enjoying the ride up. And Anastasia, you can go to the next slide. And Ether is also, I think it went up to 210, and you can see again this little blip. Yeah, looking historically up to January 2019. I mean, on this chart specifically, it doesn't look like a very significant move. But I mean, when Bitcoin moves up, other altcoins are moving as well. And there is also an expectation that once Bitcoin goes up and starts consolidating at some higher price level, the alts will also start generating good returns, following on at its footsteps, so to say, and those returns could be higher. I've also heard the opinion that Ether could outperform Bitcoin in terms of gains this year, but again, I mean, there's so many opinions online, you never know what's going to happen. And now after this chart, it's time to give the word to Ellie from Ventures. we have a few minutes for our sponsors before we jump into the main topic with Billy. And Ellie, the floor is actually yours.
Well, thank you very much, Vlad. Thank you for the invitation and for having me here. It is my pleasure to share with you two major news around us in the moment. The first one is that despite the pandemic and despite the corona crisis and the lockdown of basically half of the world, we are going to proceed with the demo day. This is the culmination of the Starfleet Accelerator. We are going to have 7 top blockchain startups from the accelerator who are going to pitch live for an investment. On top of this, we are going to have 2 panel discussions with a very interesting guests. Those are successful entrepreneurs from India as well as from our network. They're going to give some practical advices on adaptability and share their experience and something that we can all learn from, something very important in this time. So on this event, we're going to announce the winners, basically the people, the startups that are going to be joining the Eternity ecosystem, or the startups who are going to get funding and 6 more months of acceleration. So to sum up, the event will be free. It will be entirely online, and it's going to start on from 3 p.m. Bulgarian time on the 8th of May. So save the date. This is news number 1. News number 2 is that last month we have initiated a donation campaign, basically a startup relief fund on the Help Karma's platform. And this is aiming to support the Bulgarian startup ecosystem, small and medium enterprises, because right now they are deeply basically impacted by what's going on. We are asking people to help us in this because some of these businesses have been forced to shut down, to downsize, to lay off some of their employees. And this is why we initiated this campaign, because we wanted to help them get some funds for them to cover the operational costs or salaries, or simply to help them go through the crisis. So it will take as less as €5 for people to donate. If people cannot afford basically these €5, I am appealing everybody to help us reshare the campaign. I'm going to share with you right now the link, as well as I'm going to show you how the campaign is looking like. It is that one. It is that one. And Help Karma, so far we have around 10% of the amount that we are aiming at. So please help us share the word and help us support the Bulgarian businesses.
Actually, we didn't see the campaign. We just see you kind of blocked, like frozen in time. But
this is very weird. I'm going to share the link then in the event discussion, so everybody can get the chance to see the campaign, read the criteria for a startup to apply or a business to apply, and to see what exactly it is needed and why exactly we are doing that.
You can share it also in the YouTube chat, so that people who are online currently, they can have a look as well now.
Great, I'll do that. All
right. So Anastasia, it's you again.
Yeah, me again, and also with 2 news. So I'll start also with charity one. Let me just share a screen again. So Nexus started a charity campaign also, hashtag Safe with Crypto, together with Brave software via the Giving Block widget of Nexo. And we help children in need during the COVID-19 crisis. Nexo will be matching the first $10,000 worth in crypto donations to Save the Children's Snowball initiative, hashtag Safe with Stories. You can donate via the Giving block widget or through the Brave browser. And another news, Nexo is pleased to announce that we already have BCH available as a repayment option for our instant crypto credit lines. Bitcoin Cash. Let me just go back to... Okay, so yeah, stay tuned to have more products coming, and yeah, give us your feedback. We're always happy.
I must say that Nexo actually is doing a pretty good job attracting some stablecoin users with their high interest rates on deposits.
Yeah.
And I think it's currently a leader together with one other company whose name I forgot.
Very good. It's very good for us.
I think it was BlockFi or something like this. It was BlockFi, and they have just a slightly better rate. But since Nexo it's a Bulgarian company, or it's not a Bulgarian company, but it has like Bulgarian founders, Bulgarian roots. So I'll support Nexo. Currently, unfortunately, the centralized finance are not are not proposing or haven't enabled really good interest rates on deposits as far as I can see, and CFI is more attractive if you're looking for larger returns. And I'm glad that one of companies with, as I said, roots from the Bulgarian roots is a leader in the space. So I'm using it. I'm pretty so far I'm pretty happy with it. Just a few notes on my side. I don't want to make too much of an ad for Nexo, but I'm pretty happy with it.
Thank you so much, Vlad. No, seriously, I need to thank you here. Awesome feedback. We really do provide really high interest rates, up to 10% if also you stake Nexo tokens on like a range of stable coins plus fiat. Plus, soon we're adding other cryptocurrencies, so stay tuned. Thank you very much, Vlad.
All right, always a pleasure to talk about like positive stuff happening connected to the Bulgarian ecosystem. So now, actually, should we go to the slide? Can you share the presentation for this one?
Slide. Just a second.
Right. So what we are going to have now is actually we're going to jump into the topic of interoperability. And I have personally heard a lot about interoperability throughout the years. And I know that Cosmos is like one of the first projects that started working on this back in 2014 when the Tendermint protocol came out. And I know that the other company is actually Polkadot, and I'm not a huge fan of Polkadot, to be honest, for some reasons that I don't want to go into related to their founders. But it's kind of related to eternity and so forth and so on. But so that's why I decided that the best company to help us jump into the topic of interoperability and actually tell us what has really happened since 2014 in this field is Cosmos. And I'm pretty happy that Cosmos they were super fast to react and to basically say yes to my invitation to join our event online and really talk about this topic. And we have Billy Rennekamp, who actually could. There is a good chance that I've actually been in the same room with when I've been to Berlin in one of the offices of a company that we work with, which is called Ape Unit, and I've possibly even saw him on a computer somewhere, but I didn't know that he is that person. So it's a very small blockchain world, I must say. So without further ado, I would like to give the word to Billy, and he will, possibly start with a little introduction to, what is he doing and what is the Cosmos ecosystem doing now, and so forth and so on. And then we can continue with questions. But Billy, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Am I showing up? Am I sound,
Yes.
everything working? Great. Cool. Thanks very much for having me on. Happy to grab the time to speak about interoperability. I'll be talking about, the landscape for interoperability is very large, so I'll just cover the stuff that I know best, which is mostly around Ethereum, and of course around Cosmos and Polkadot. It's never enough time to go over all this sort of stuff, so forgive me that I'm leaving out certain topics, but hope to talk about it in a general sense and then dive into some more details with the time we have. So with that, I will hope that I do this correctly and share my screen. And is that showing up correctly?
Yes, we can see it.
Cool. So my name is Billy Rennekamp. I'm working right now at the Interchain Foundation, which is the nonprofit foundation which operated the fundraiser and helps sort of coordinate the construction of the Internet of Blockchains, Cosmos Network specifically in the configuration of that. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. Kentucky is the home place of bourbon, whiskey, racehorses, and bluegrass music. So if you're interested in any of those topics, reach out to me later. Mentioned I've been working with Cosmos and the Interchain Foundation for a few years. I'm on the board of management at the Interchain Foundation, and I operate the grants department. I was previously developer relations engineer at Tendermint. I first joined as a front-end developer working on the Looney wallet and Block Explorer while I was participating in a lot of projects in the Ethereum space. Beginning of that as well, working with ApeUnit that Vlad mentioned and some of their early Ethereum experiments in coordination with Eternity. I'm the author of the NFT module within the Cosmos SDK. I work closely with ChainSafe on the Ethermint module, which is the EVM that runs on the Cosmos SDK. I've been a big proponent of burner chains, which are basically proof of concept chains with low security for fast iterations. Independent of those things, I launched Clover's Network, which is an Ethereum application that uses non-fungible tokens and bonding curves. That was built on behalf of Ben Studio, a group that I work with in Berlin from time to time, dev and design agency. A lot of work around bonding curves, market makers, especially in coordination with other projects like Gnosis, Aragon, and token engineering initiatives. And I'm a big fan of hackathons. I've been to most of the ETH Global hackathons. I've won a bunch of them. Big fan in general of that format. So that's me. Today I'm going to be talking about interoperability. And when we talk about interoperability, I think it's good to sort of zoom out a bit and talk about what we're really talking about, which are the core components of all blockchains, which are very dependable interfaces, what are really APIs. And no matter whether a network is interoperable with another network, what I think is really important to note here is that blockchains in general offer more dependable interfaces than a traditional web stack. You can imagine the sort of scenario that we all saw when the Web 2.0 really exploded and you had a bunch of these application program interfaces like Twitter and Google, things opening up that allows you to sort of build businesses on top of other businesses. And this was really exciting because, Twitter can make a product and then you can make a product that uses Twitter, but Twitter doesn't need to have been designed specifically for you. It was just designed in a way so that you can piggyback on what they're doing and do something completely new. And this sort of allows a multitude of sort of diverse applications. What is the downside of having APIs that are run by entities like Twitter is that their APIs are dependent on their business model. And if that business model changes, their API will change as well. And your business could go out the door along with it. So what's really great about these more dependable APIs that we see on blockchain networks is that they are much more reliable. In general, they won't change unless the ways that they change are sort of built in from the ground up. So you're very aware of how and when those things might change. Or they're built in a way so that they never change. This idea of immutable code, reliable code, there's no sort of force at work that may take those down beside the network itself. The network itself, of course, being built around assumptions around economic incentives to ensure that those endpoints and those applications are always available. And you can do things like money Lego blocks in which you build, tools and applications which combine protocols and apps that already exist in ways that you can rely on them existing. I have a picture here of a aircraft getting refueled in midair. This is a very precarious interface, I would say, that takes very tight integration, but the goal is to have this sort of extreme coordination, but in much more robust and reliable ways. The way I want to talk about it first is in the context of Ethereum 1.x. Of course, I say 1.x because that's the working mainnet Ethereum compared to the ETH 2.0, which is basically a completely separate network that will eventually exist and hopefully fold in 1.x. And you're probably familiar with Ethereum 1.x. It utilizes the Ethereum virtual machine. Some attributes of that are that they have a shared state and synchronous access. What's really amazing about that is that you can deploy separate applications, and because they have such tightly knit resources, they can coordinate with each other in really, really amazing ways. For instance, if you had an app that maybe withdrew money from one app and then deposited it in another app to perform some action, in a normal API that would maybe be asynchronous, you could imagine withdrawing money from a bank or something like that, and then that app wanted to use that money in a secondary place, but maybe something's changed from the time that it withdrew the money to when it was meant to deposit it or use it. At that point, the money's already been withdrawn, but now it can't go where it was meant to. So you have this, half completed process. When you have a shared state, like in the Ethereum virtual machine, you can combine those actions into a single transaction so that if one part of it fails, the entire thing can be reverted. Things like atomic swaps and interoperable actions like that become really, really exciting because they are all so tightly coupled. The other aspect that's interesting to note is when it comes to these interfaces, often it's just about the way that you talk to these different applications, and that relies on a standards process. In the Ethereum world, they use the Ethereum improvement proposals, which are paired with requests for comment inside the Ethereum GitHub repo. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure when or why you should refer to some standard as an ERC versus an EIP. As far as I know, they both go through that same process, but you're definitely familiar with ERC20, probably familiar with ERC 721. That's the fungible token standard and the non-fungible token standard. My favorite or maybe unsung hero, I think, is EIP 165 or ERC 165, which is the standard interface detection. This is an interface inside of a smart contract that lets you check for other interfaces. So first you would say to this smart contract, hey, do you support 165? And it would be able to return true, yes, I do. Then you'd be able to use that interface to say, hey, do you support ERC 721? And you'll be able to say, yes, you do, or no, you don't. Depending on that, you'll be able to take further steps like using the transfer function or using the total supply, all these different sort of endpoints, which should be accessible in a token standard like 721. So this is a way you sort of can begin from being completely blind and sort of like feeling out these interfaces until you're aware of exactly how to interact with them. So this is sort of like interoperability that's available now and really sort of amazing within Ethereum 1.x. The result of this is composability. You have this sort of Cambrian explosion of products which are building on each other's protocols. The reason they're able to do that is because they're able to rely on those protocols either changing in an expected way or not changing at all. And this is the term that you're probably familiar with about like Lego blocks or money as Lego blocks, where you can build new structures out of them. And you get, the audience ultimately benefits because you have a real wide variety of products who can compete at each other. It's a really successful outcome. The problem, as everyone knows, is that you can either please all of the people some of the time, please some of the people all the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. Often this is referred to in other terms by the trilemma, which in its most basic form, you can have something that's good, fast, and or cheap. You can only have two of those things ever, though. One of them is always going to fail. The other sort of problem is that when you have something like the Ethereum mainnet, which is essentially a compatible time sharing system, you have a bunch of people who are using the same virtual machine, and they're basically getting in line like an old university computer and taking turns, running their operations on this big shared system, is that you're never going to be able to agree on exactly what features are necessary for everybody. The model that I like to look at is the internet itself. The internet, which is this sort of highly successful network of computers, is not a single computer itself. It is an extremely diverse, homogeneous group of computers that each have their own sort of needs, wants, and services. They're also not all a single stack. If you're familiar with this tech stack website, it does a really great job going through popular applications and discussing all of the components that are used there. A lot of them are common, but a lot of them are different because everyone has different needs. So it's a way that the sort of current technological landscape has addressed this same sort of problem of a shared state that we see in Ethereum. It's never going to be able to satisfy everybody all the time. And at the same time, it's not able to provide the resources for everybody to, say, run their own systems at the same time. And so in the same way that the internet is not a single computer and the internet is not a single stack, the interchain is not a single chain. This is the sort of landscape that we've started to see over the last few years, addressing the scalability issues that we have seen most prominently around Ethereum. And so one of the sort of ways that that's played out is you've seen more EVM networks like Proof of Authority Network and XDAI. There's a lot of other sort of EVM-based projects that are currently being built, a lot of layer 2 solutions. And this is great because it addresses sort of those issues about either scalability or sovereignty that you see that are becoming a problem on Ethereum. But it has its own problems. Once you've sort of moved an application onto, let's call it an application-specific blockchain or a more specialized blockchain, it no longer has that direct access to those other applications like we talked about earlier. If you have one app deployed on Ethereum and you have your app deployed on the XDAI chain, how can you utilize those attributes, assets, or applications that are on Ethereum? And most of the solutions we see are around bridges that use oracles or trusted operators, because at the end of the day, an oracle is really just a party who is verifying or providing information from an off-chain data source to another on-chain data source. And in the situation that you have two EVM chains, that off-chain data just so happens to be on-chain somewhere else, but you're basically wanting to know what is the state of that contract or what is the state of that application on that very far away blockchain from where I am. The problem with those oracles is that they often have their own trust assumptions or the ability for those operators to run off with funds. There's a lot of really interesting and good work being done on minimizing those trust assumptions. A lot of work around optimistic rollups can actually be reapplied in this, where you have sort of either fraud proofs about state on different EVM chains, or you're optimistic about the state until those fraud proofs can be verified, or you're using something like light clients to verify the state transitions that took place on another chain. The problem with a lot of these, especially when they deal with mainnet Ethereum, is that they all have probabilistic finality. And probabilistic finality is a reference to the Nakamoto consensus, proof of work, and the longest chain rule. So this is the reason why on an exchange, when you make a deposit or something like that, they'll ask you to wait 8 confirmations, 10 confirmations, 30 confirmations of blocks before allowing you to actually use those funds, because at any given moment, a miner could show up with the equivalent amount of work performed on a proof of work chain that produced a chain with more blocks, and it will become the de facto real chain until it is either unseated or more blocks are produced on top of it. So you're never actually 100% sure that there won't be a reorganization of a chain, which could mean that a new one is produced that does not include your transaction, for instance, and maybe it will not produce the evidence of the state on a different chain. So if you're waiting for a deposit on mainnet Ethereum in order to mint an equivalent token on XDAI or on some other chain, if mainnet Ethereum reorganizes and your original transaction is never included, you've just basically performed a double spend attack. Sharded networks are another sort of solution that's been in the works for a while about how to address these scalability issues, these feature set issues while still maintaining some degree of tight integration, so that you still have some degree of access or control over different what are essentially independent blockchains. And that takes place with sort of coordinator chains, sometimes called relayer chains. So ETH 2.0 and Polkadot are the two big ones that are doing this, but there are other ones out there as well. And when it comes to sort of coordinating between these otherwise independent blockchains, they both have their own messaging protocols that are underdeveloped. ETH 2.0 has been referring to it as cross-shard communication. Polkadot's been referring to it as cross-chain message passing, XAMP. And the benefit of both of these messaging protocols is that because within ETH 2.0 or because within Polkadot, there are such sort of ingrained architectural decisions, you can make certain trust assumptions. Because you're dealing between two shards of the same ETH network, you can depend on both of those shards being coordinated by the same coordinator chain, and you get as a benefit of that sort of some pre-understanding of exactly who you're dealing with when you send messages between those two shards. Same as for Polkadot, and that's a benefit of that sort of tight integration. That's only possible because they have finality, of course, and they have these very similar execution environments. So they're both operating on the idea of some flavor of proof of stake with some flavor of finality gadgets, so that you don't have the same chain reorganization problem. The sort of drawbacks to these scenarios is that you are in some ways restricted to those shared systems. You still don't have the full tightness of, like, let's say a single EVM. You're not able to have like full synchronicity. And it's just a very sort of large coordination problem, which is why both projects have taken so long and will probably take much longer to sort of figure out all of the details of those implementations, specs and implementations. The sort of method that I'm a bigger fan of, and the reason why I'm involved in the Cosmos project, is where you have less sort of coordinated central organization and less similarities between chains. You sort of design it with the idea that every chain would be much more heterogeneous, much more different, the same way the internet is composing of computers and servers, which are much more different from each other, but that they're built in this way to have a common communication protocol between them. In the internet, that's TCP/IP. In blockchain world, it's inter-blockchain communication. And you get the sort of benefits that I mentioned earlier of being able to have very sort of specific design choices going into exactly what your network needs, whether it's levels of decentralization, whether it's specific programming languages, whether it's operating like application features, but you're not restricted by the feature set of your environment, like the EVM or something like that. But you're still able to benefit from this communication composability between applications. And the sort of going way of thinking about this architecturally is to use the hub and spoke model. So this is the way that airports are designed and the internet itself is designed, where you have these sort of common pathways that become hubs that will route traffic between more independent applications. We call them zones. And the benefit of this IBC is while it takes a little bit more overhead to communicate with it, because you're interacting between what are possibly such different entities. The benefit of it is that in some ways is the benefit of it, is that you're able to interact with entities which are so different. The drawback is that you need to have a couple more steps to establish that connection between each other. Similar to TCP/IP, there's a handshake that takes place, basically an exchange of messages passed back and forth. I think there's a total of 4 or 6 of them, in which header data, information about the source and the destination are traded back and forth. There's a similar sort of silly dance of, hi, I exist. Hi, I acknowledge you exist. I exist. Hi, I acknowledge that you acknowledge that I exist. Now that you acknowledge that I exist, I'm going to acknowledge that you exist, and we can now continue talking to each other normally. So that's the sort of added overhead that's required in a scenario like this compared to ETH 2.0 or Polkadot, where they don't have to do as many sort of who the hell are you conversations and the establishment of that channel between them. But once it's been established, you can start sending data back and forth. And that data comes with subsequent header information, which includes like, what is the current state of the origin chain? What is the current state of the destination chain? And those keep that channel updated, because every time a packet is sent back and forth, they're able to make, basically a new record of the source. Oh, that chain has these things going on. These are the headers that are relevant to it, so that when a new packet comes forth, you can actually verify that that packet really did come from the chain that it said it came from. And this is done with light client verification, similar to the sort of optimistic rollup scenario I was talking before, but with a lot of added benefits, mostly as a result of using Tendermint. Vlad mentioned earlier, Tendermint's been around since 2014. It's built on work that actually began in the 70s on PBFT. Mostly the changes were around scaling the number of participants in a network. It's been used into validator sets of thousands, but generally it's recommended to use it in the validator sets of hundreds if you want to sort of have high guarantees of transaction throughput, et cetera. It's built as being BFT. It means that it's built in a way that it can handle Byzantine behavior. So Byzantine behavior is either malicious operators inside of a public network, meaning you can run a network and anybody can join it, even if they're trying to attack the network, or if they're just inept, if they're doing a bad job keeping their system running. So that's really beneficial when you're dealing with these open and public networks. We recommend a delegated proof of stake system using Tendermint. This provides instant confirmation, this sort of block finality that we were talking about earlier, that is a real Achilles heel for talking between two probabilistic EVM chains or something like that. The spec has been formally proven. It's generally sort of called the gold standard of proof of stake. It's currently securing over $5 billion worth of assets on different networks, including BINANCE chain and the Cosmos Hub, of course. And it generally, we approach the idea of scaling with it as a vertical scaling solution instead of a horizontal scaling solution. Horizontal might point to like ETH 2.0 or Polkadot, where you want to maximize the number of transactions on a single network. Whereas a vertical solution would be, let's say, if you have an application and it's running with a validator set and you're running into limits of transaction throughput, you would basically split the network in half and have two autonomous networks who have this ability to communicate between each other with IBC. So in a way, it's just partitions of the same network. And in that way, you've doubled your capacity. So that's what we usually talk about when we talk about general vertical scaling solutions and the way Tendermint can help with that. Result of that, you can see sort of a diagram of the Cosmos Hub here in the middle. So Cosmos Hub is really just kind of plumbing. It's a plumbing hub for application-specific blockchains that are built with their own feature set. We built the Cosmos SDK as a toolkit for building applications in Go to be performant and IBC enabled out of the box. But there's nothing about the programming language or the state machine framework that you'd like to use, as long as it involves a finality gadget or instant finality in the consensus and has efficient light clients that can be used to verify the transaction on both sides of those networks. Then it can join via IBC. As a sort of model on the internet, been calling it the internet of blockchains, this hub and spoke model makes a lot of sense. Of course, it doesn't make sense if there's only one hub. So while the Cosmos Hub is a hub that uses the Atom as a staking token, it's not the only one. The Iris Hub is a network that's been operating in China for about a year, and they have a different set of features. You might have different reasons why you would prefer to move tokens through the Iris Hub versus another one. I think they have a partnership with BINANCE as well directly that maybe has certain regulatory benefits depending on your jurisdiction. Agoric is a smart contracting platform that would be connected to the hub. And basically as a sort of hub, the benefit is that you don't need to make an IBC connection from every single blockchain to every other blockchain. Like I mentioned, there's a little bit of sort of communication overhead in establishing that connection between each other. Because that's sort of an exponential number of connections, it makes a lot more sense to use common hubs and just route traffic through there so that you can just maintain one or two connections, but still have access to a much larger breadth of the network. Realistically, that ends up looking a bit like this. So this is a visualization of a current test network that uses IBC. This is in preparation for the Game of Zones adversarial test network. So in this model, all of these large spheres are actual blockchains. All of the very small spheres are validators on the different blockchain networks, and all of the connections between them are IBC channels. So this is, actually much closer to what you would imagine the actual internet looks like. This is a much more robust network. One of the really great features of a system like this is that it becomes very anti-fragile. So if one network goes down, there's still so many other connections between disparate parties that you can still route traffic between all of them. This is what a truly decentralized system looks like. The problem with these more sort of coordinated systems is that while it buys you a lot of benefits, whether it's a shared security model or like that tightly integrated access to each other's application state, the fallback is that if that system breaks down at one point, the whole system sort of comes to a stop. It's a less anti-fragile. You have trade-offs, and I think that there's an argument to be made for both systems. I just happen to be more of a fan of this one. If you're interested in Game of Zones, this adversarial test network, it's beginning this month. You can check it out at cosmos.network/GOZ. And this is a adversarial test network similar to the one that was run at the beginning of last year before the launch of the Cosmos Hub. Basically, it encourages users to really stress test the new infrastructure. It also encourages hackers, white hat hackers basically, to get paid to find vulnerabilities early on, save us money, much more money down the road. It'll be running for about a month. There's a bunch of different contests within the game to win atoms. Stuff like whoever can build a zone that has the most IBC packets passed in the first week and the second week. So it's not all just finding exploits. Some of it is just being a heavy duty user. It's also a great way to get familiar with the architecture and the system of running a validator in these systems. One of the real big benefits of the SDK, the Cosmos SDK, is that if you run a validator on one network, you can reproduce the entire setup on all the other networks that use the same infrastructure. So you kind of have a real decrease in the engineering overhead and being a validator operator on multiple networks. This will be a really, really great opportunity to try that out. Something else that I should mention is there's currently ongoing a cross-chain hackathon on Gitcoin with $15,000 in prizes of atoms for projects built using any of the Cosmos SDK, any of the Cosmos stack. So using Ethermint, the EVM module, IBC itself, which is now available, Cosmos SDK, Peggy, which is a bridge module for talking to probabilistic chains, like I mentioned earlier. So that's ongoing now, and there's a link for that as well. Just to reiterate on what we talked about today, when it comes to interoperability, we're really talking about dependable interfaces, and that requires good standards, and it results in composability, which is this sort of expounding payback of benefits when you have these different apps. You can enable other applications without even realizing it. When you have tight coordination, you have a lower overhead, but you have less diversity and it's more fragile. When you have looser coordination, you have a higher overhead of communication, but it allows for more diversity and a less fragile system. So that's all. Thank you for having me. My name again is Billy Rennekamp. My Twitter is at Billy Rennekamp. GitHub is okay with me. You can reach me by email, billy@interchain.io. My website is okay with me, spelled like that. So that was very, very fast. It's hard to speak on these online things because I never quite know if you're with me. I'm sure that a lot of that went over people's heads or just I was speaking too fast. It always happens. I'm a fast speaker. So if there's any questions out there, I'd be happy to begin answering them.
Hey, thank you for this intro. It was quite extensive, I would say. And indeed, there was a lot of information regarding Cosmos and how interoperability actually works. I can start with a few questions that I have. So as far as I understand, in order to get these non-probabilistic chains connected to, let's say, to the Cosmos Hub, you need to kind of have this spec zone in between. Can you explain, for example, and since one of these non-probabilistic blockchains is Bitcoin, because of its proof of work, CBO attack protection, and the Nakamoto consensus. So does the testnet of Cosmos have like a connection to Bitcoin? Is this connection stable? Is it working? Is it usable? Like, what can it be used for, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, great question. I would just to grab the word probabilistic. It's that the Bitcoin is probabilistic. So non-probabilistic ones are the easy ones. That's like Tezos, ETH 2.0, Polkadot. All of these chains will be easy for the Cosmos Hub or for other chains to talk to. But yeah, you're right. When it talks to these ones which will remain probabilistic, ETH 1.x and Bitcoin, you have the same problems as when they're trying to talk to each other, which is that the chain could get reorganized anyway. And so some of the methods that people use are these trusted bridges where you have either a company who you trust them to do it, or they minimize the trust by using different proof verifications. So Suma One is a project that's been working for a long time on different ways to bridge Bitcoin to Ethereum and other networks, as well as a project called Nomic. So I believe they both have Bitcoin bridge test networks running, and they both have different methods for verifying the transactions on one network on the other. These are the sort of light client proofs that still reference the Nakamoto consensus. And they both have different assumptions on the confirmation time. So when you use these networks, they rely on a waiting period, basically, similar to when you talk to an exchange. And it's possible, and it's very likely to see many bridges actually between SDK Cosmos chains and probabilistic networks, each of them with their own feature set. So some of them might have very low fees, but very high trust assumptions. Maybe you really trust the company doing it, and they will do like a confirmation period of 0. You know what I mean? Because they're willing to sort of eat the loss because it provides a better user service, but maybe they charge more because of that, or they charge very little, but they give very small guarantees about the trust. It's basically use at your own risk. And so the way I've seen it start to roll out with I think there's 3 or 4 Ethereum sort of peg zone projects which are forming. They each have their own sort of offers of feature set. They why you would choose to use one over the other. Maybe one is like I mentioned, more centralized, but it can offer other things. One is more decentralized, but it takes longer, for instance, because it has, it makes you wait 100 confirmations or something like that. That's the sort of like variety that we're going to start seeing when these networks come online, because all of the sort of value and liquidity are very much on, these probabilistic networks at this point. And in order to sort of allow those assets and those applications to reach these other areas where they might be able to perform their sort of intended tasks with less overhead, or maybe, like Aragon has been working on their own independent chain because they have governance issues with Ethereum. Their entire stack was broken after the last upgrade on Ethereum mainnet because of the way gas was handled. So they had all these gas costs that are hard-coded in their contracts, which because the transfer rate or something like that was changed on Ethereum, all these contracts broke, and their voice wasn't loud enough. Their opinion wasn't important enough to the wider Ethereum mainnet for it to matter. And that's the problem when you have a bunch of people who have the same resources, is that some of them are going to get left behind because they're just not as important as the entire system itself.
Okay, so I can see, like, it's to me it's a bit it comes natural for Ethereum to kind of be connected to the Cosmos ecosystem, and you mentioned there are a couple of connections already being worked on. I think there is also like this Ether Mint. What is it called? It's just Ethereum on Cosmos, as far as I understood. But yeah, how about like Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin something that you guys are looking for? And this is kind of related to the fact that I see this movement, especially in, for example, the DeFi sphere, where a lot of companies or projects are trying to put Bitcoins on Ethereum. And this is kind of like, to me, it's a type of interoperability. And of course, we're not looking here for like a third party, a centralized third party that is custodian of the Bitcoins, like holds the Bitcoins and then creates tokens on Ethereum that are actually like these Bitcoin, represent these Bitcoins. But we are looking for something that is trustless. And I kind of feel that Cosmos is really suitable for this type of a use case, to like bringing Bitcoin tokens on Ethereum, let's say, or on the Cosmos network in a trustless way. So is this something interesting that you guys are looking at? Because I really see a boom of this happening right now, like bringing Bitcoin on a smart contract platform.
Absolutely, and I think the two projects that I think are doing the most exciting work in that area are the ones I mentioned earlier, which is Suma One, James Prestwich, and Nomic, which have a Bitcoin test network running right now that both have very sort of like trust minimal, zero trust sort of methods for moving those assets. It's funny. I've also witnessed a bet between one of the engineers on IBC and kind of a Bitcoin maximalist that in 10 years, the majority of Bitcoins will exist not on the Bitcoin network was the bet. And I can believe it. You know, I can see that future. I think there's a lot of issues with the longevity of the operation of the Bitcoin network, but I think that the sort of inertia and value and the meme of Bitcoin as an asset will actually outlive the physical infrastructure and operation of that network itself.
Cool.
Controversial opinion.
All right, thanks. Let me see if I have some questions coming from the audience here.
I can pop in. There is a question already. So from Yurdan Georgiev, how Cosmos unify different consensus mechanisms?
So what's cool about IBC is that the requirements for using it are relatively low. So one is the instant confirmation or finality in general. So that includes the use of finality gadgets like in Grandpa and Bape on Polkadot, or in the different proof of stake systems that are being discussed for ETH 2.0, as well as the consensus on networks like Tezos. The requirement is that it has finality so that we don't get into this chain reorganization problem. And the other one is efficient light clients. So basically, you would have a light client of different consensus mechanisms on both sides of those chains. The Cosmos Hub will probably be sort of the most encouraging of running light clients for all the different varieties of consensus algorithms out there to make sure that it's able to create IBC connections between them. That'll be sort of like a feature set of the Cosmos Hub compared to maybe, you know, I decide to make my game, and my game is a blockchain app. It's an application specific blockchain. It has its own features. I don't want to necessarily include on my application light clients for 100 different consensus algorithms, but I do want to create a light client with one to the Cosmos Hub. So I can still talk to the Cosmos Hub. Cosmos Hub is in charge of maintaining light clients to all this large variety of consensus mechanisms. And then my game app can still talk to all of these other ones via the Cosmos Hub or via a secondary hub in case I want to have like a little bit more robust available connection system.
Okay, so in relation to this,
I mean, maybe just to reiterate that topic in general is something that, you know, is definitely like a priority for especially the Interchain Foundation. So if you're working on other networks and you're interested in sort of making sure that they can use IBC, whether it's about making those light clients available or just the work of coordinating the spec of IBC with those various light client implementations, that's definitely the kind of work that we're excited about seeing and would be happy to support.
Okay, so thanks on this. It was very interesting to figure out that actually the Cosmos Hub is maintaining these connections. But like, as far as I understand, Tendermint BFT is it's an engine that kind of includes 3 different layers like networking and consensus and applications. So it's very useful. And it's thanks to the BFT part, I guess, it also provides, I would say, a larger or more robust security in comparison to proof of work. And I just mean one thing here, which is in proof of work, when you have a 51% of the network, you can do an attack. And as far as I understand, in Tendermint, BFT, or generally in BFT algorithms or consensus mechanisms, you can have a well-functioning network as long as 1/3 of the validators are actually well intended, or are good guys, so to say. But what if let's say that something happens and like to the consensus, and this brings the Cosmos hub, which maintains all these different connections with everyone else, down? What happens to your zone in this situation? Like, because you have just one connection with the Cosmos hub, and then it kind of goes down for some reason. This is like my first question. And my second question is, like, you mentioned that, for example, Tezos could be a zone connected to the Cosmos hub. And like both the Cosmos hub and Tezos have a light client running on both, so that they can communicate through the IBC, I guess. What happens if like Tezos updates like to a different version? Like, how do the update of the light clients happen? Is it automatic, or is there something that Tezos need to do and the Cosmos hub managers need to do? So these are like my two questions.
Cool. So let's go to the first one, which is what happens if like a common connection goes down between two parties. This is a scenario in which you would not be connected to each other if you only have a single outgoing connection. And it's why, we encourage this sort of large and robust sort of ecosystem of hubs and zones. I think realistically, we're going to see a lot of zones which are connected directly to each other, because maybe they have very sort of integrated use cases between each other. And then we're going to see different hubs, which either because they were designed to be so, like the hub, like the Cosmos hub, become the interchannel, or just because they become common paths. So if there was, for instance, like a MakerDAO chain, and more applications were using DAI as a stable token, they might create connections directly to the Maker chain and end up, using that as their routing hub more often than the Cosmos hub. But in general, it would be it would be a low security model if you only kept a connection to a single route. And so the idea is that if you wanted to provide higher integrity of that system, you should have more than one connection. But the sort of general thinking around all of the architecture is that none of those design decisions should be made from a central authority. It's not up to me to make sure that you maintain more than one hub connection for your network. It depends on what your network is doing. If you don't need that sort of overhead, then I'm not going to harass you for not having it. You know what I mean? It's up to the actual applications themselves to use the features that they need for their purposes. So if you have a network which is really sort of security critical, you're going to think about exactly what number of connections are necessary for you to maintain that level of operability at all times. But you shouldn't force somebody like a toy or a game to have that same sort of overhead for maintenance. Second question was, what happens if there are changes to, say, Tezos, and they want to talk to each other? So the scenario that is similar enough, I think, would be, let's say you've got two chains who have a connection via IBC. One of the designs around at least proof of stake is something called the long range attack, which is why you need to have 3 weeks time period to unbond from a validator. And so this is this idea that, like, if you are maybe buying up tons of these tokens on a network because you're going to perform double spend, you're going to attack it by actually getting that 66% of the validator's control. If you were to do something like that and then attack that network, and then you wanted to say move all of those tokens off of that network, or move all of your own money off of the network so that you can sell the tokens that you double spent or something like that. The problem is the nothing at stake problem, which is that as soon as you've made that attack, you can move that money away and sell it and get out of there before the whole token's value crashes, right? And so one of the sort of methods around preventing those sorts of attacks is an unbonding period. So if you are a validator, you have to stake these tokens to be able to have control of this validation process. But in order to sell those tokens, you need to unbond them. If you have a 2 to 3 week period of unbonding, that means that once you've taken control of this network and attacked it, you aren't able to benefit from those tokens you stole because they're all locked up, and you have to wait the 3 weeks for that entire market to crash on that asset that you've essentially destroyed. And so as a feature of that, when dealing with IBC, like I mentioned before, you've created this channel between these two networks, and it basically has information about one network on the other, header information about the consensus, what is the state, and things like that. And whenever you send a packet, you include metadata that allows each chain to get updates about the other one's state. It also allows you to verify that that packet really came from where it says it did. It says like, here's my proof that I actually was included in a block on this chain. Here's records of all of the blocks that were created since the last time we talked. So that receiving end is able to run through those, verify this packet really came from where it said it is, verify it's really included in the application state of where it said it came from, and process that transaction. However, if no packets pass forth for that like 3 week period, that means that it could be coming from a forked version of that network. And so the receiving end says, cool, I'm glad that you have information about the last 6 weeks of information, but I can only trust this up to the 3 weeks that it would have taken somebody to do that unbonding and actually have splintered or destroyed or created an entirely separate network. And so after 3 weeks, the IBC packet needs to have a new channel reestablishment. And so the way that those are basically being handled right now is two thoughts. And the one that seems the sort of most arduous but the most safe is that the sort of tokens which have been locked up from these two different networks on each other, if 3 weeks pass, they basically are sort of frozen on both of those networks unless a new channel is established and a manual governance proposal is able to connect and say, hey, that previous channel is the same as this new channel, but we're not just going to give that to you out of the box until we can actually go through the process of looking at it closely, verifying that it was just because there was a breakdown of communication in between those. So I can imagine that a situation with like Tezos in a sort of worst case scenario would go through a similar process, which is, we know that we talked to you in the past. You seem to be very different to us now, because time has passed or something has changed. And so the only way that we're going to sort of honor that previous connection is through the manual process of governance. That's the sort of like fallback method. There are other sort of methods that are called dynamic IBC, which can provide less arduous ways to connect with that. But that's sort of further down the road in terms of exactly what's being implemented right now.
I have a question here, if you don't mind, like on this part exactly with the verification of the actors wouldn't be, it's just a thought, wouldn't be like time saving easier, some kind of a zero knowledge proof solution. So you don't like verify every time Tezos here something changed for those like past, I don't know, 2 years. Let's do all the thing like all over again.
Yeah, actually, you should look up Chris Goes as the lead architect on IBC, and he's very active in the Zcash community, a big zero knowledge proponent. And he actually was on an episode of Zero Knowledge Podcast relatively recently talking about some of these ideas. They're very, very exciting, but again, they're sort of in the much longer sort of term. One of the things that Cosmos has always worked on is to make very like small but practical steps towards achieving these larger goals, which is why we were able to sort of, launch later than we actually hoped, of course. But even Tendermint, you could say the versions that we've had over the last 5 years are all incremental improvements on something that we already have as a very like solid ground base, this PBFT work from the 70s. And so being able to make small but concrete improvements on things that we feel 100% sure about has been sort of the operating mindset from the beginning. And while these zero knowledge implementations or improvements on IBC are absolutely things that we've dreamed about, we're focusing on the small and practical first.
Okay, cool. A few more questions. We have like 10 more minutes, up to 9. I don't see any coming from the audience, but I have a few. Actually, some of mine you already answered, but I would like to comment on something like a recent development. I'm not sure if you have actually heard, but there is this China chain that just came out or was announced like this week or previous week. I'm not super sure. I think it was like the last 10 days. And it's considered to be actually an interoperable network, and it's connecting, as far as I learned from the news, Hyperledger and Ethereum and EOS, and it's also actually claiming to be the Internet of blockchains. Have you guys like looked into this China chain thing with the it's launched by BSN? Do you think it's something interesting, or is it a competitor, or how do you feel about this?
I mean, interoperability is definitely on the sort of deliverable list for, I think, a lot of projects, and it has been for a while. I feel like we've been talking about it for a while, and it's been really validating to see so many other projects sort of come around to this way of speaking about things. What's been also really sort of nice for, I mean, me personally, just working on the project, because I'm interested in so many other projects at the same time, is that the sort of mission and the objective of Cosmos and the Interchain only succeeds the more networks there are in the world, especially the ones who have interoperability as something they'd support. You know, we are working hard on IBC because we think that it's the sort of most versatile version and most trustless way to communicate between networks. And we are really hoping that other people will save themselves the time and effort to build their own protocols and be able to just use theirs. We're sort of keeping an eye on the progress of ETH 2.0, making sure that once they get to the point of really speccing out their cross shard, that they fully look through IBC, because it might be the case that it makes more sense just to use IBC to talk between shards on ETH 2.0. And so the more sort of ways that chains can be connected, the more of a benefit we're into. So like when these projects come out, we're excited about them. I haven't looked at this one specifically up close, so I'm not sure exactly what they're offering in terms of operability. I think that there's a lot of networks offering a lot of different ways to do it. When you really drill down through most of them, you find out that there's often, you know, benefits and tradebacks of their systems, whether it's centralization here or a trusted party there, or great, this is less trusted, but maybe it takes more time, or maybe it has more operational overcost. You know, it's this sort of trilemma problem. And that's also the benefit of a large ecosystem, is that, you know, you don't have to all be stuck with the same solution. You're able to have a large variety of solutions. And whenever you have that, you know, the users ultimately benefit, because the more options that are available, the sort of better options float to the surface.
Yeah, well, definitely this one is a bit specific, since it's considered to be a Chinese government project, and it's also mentioned that the cryptography that is going to be used inside of it has some like Chinese characteristics. So especially when it comes to trustlessness, I'm not sure this is like the best way forward, or their solution is the best one. But yeah, maybe going into enterprise a little bit, I know that the Tendermint protocol or engine, I'm not sure which one is the correct, but it can also be used for like the creation of zones on the application layer that are completely private, and it could be used for enterprise. Have you thought of actually engaging with any enterprises, or like at least some kind of a connection to either Corda or like Hyperledger, or are these in any way interested? Or maybe the approach that you guys are taking is that you're kind of expecting or waiting for those projects to be interested to join that network and be connected to all other protocols in this way.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'd want to point out is that when you say you guys, you know, I'd like to take credit for being part of an organization who's coordinating everybody. But the reality is that, you know, this is open source software, and we have users of Tendermint that we don't even know about. You know, we get knocks at the door sometimes with questions from people who've been using it for years and just had no idea. Enterprise, governments, everybody, you know, some of them are not allowed to be public about it. You know, you even see like some people with burner GitHub accounts who are making issues. to get answers, but can't really reveal the organization, who they are using it. So enterprise and all of these sort of different various user types we're super excited about. As part of the Interchain Foundation, we try to do our best to support the ecosystem, but there's plenty of projects working without our help, without our assistance, without our knowledge. When it comes to like Burrow and things like that, as my understanding is that a lot of that work is built upon early versions of Tendermint or variations of Tendermint. So in a lot of ways, they're all sort of like geared towards being possible to interoperate already. I think a lot of projects are basically just waiting for IBC to launch to evaluate whether it is going to save them time and money to use it. I think that's ultimately what's going to make those decisions more than strategic partnerships or things like that. So we've really, always focused on making effective technology that will actually save people money instead of, backroom deals or anything like that. It's the other sort of aspect of specifically Cosmos that I really love, which is that there's no token lock-in. If the Cosmos hub fails to perform as a good plumbing of IBC packets, the network itself could disappear. Maybe it could change into having some other purpose. But there's nothing about the Atom token that is required to use IBC or to use the Internet of Blockchains. If you decide that the Atom token and the validator set of the Cosmos hub is the most secure and the most public decentralized route, that's great, and we've done a great job. But there's nothing about the failure, the success of the Cosmos hub for the failure or the success of the Interchain. All of that is much more agnostic to that use case. So we're excited for the entire network to get bigger than anything that we would be able to coordinate or control or anything like that. And when it comes to enterprise, and actually even with regard to the way you're describing the Chinese government, it doesn't sound like that's necessarily a network that I would want to personally use. But I think that having a surveillance chain is probably really useful for a bunch of specific users in China who need to make sure that they're seen, or else their business is not acknowledged by the Chinese government. So if you need a surveillance chain, be my guest, use it for your use case. I just probably am not a participant, but who am I to judge for you using it? And in a similar way, it's the case for enterprise. Probably a lot more scenarios that I would be excited about using it in many enterprise cases. But the design of Tendermint is agnostic to the asset that's being used to verify the weight, let's say the authority that you have when making proposals for blocks. So in one scenario, you could imagine these, it could be basically using the full delegated proof of stake system, except for the parties who have that stake at the beginning are 10 companies who have a legal agreement between each other. Maybe it's the same company who runs 10 different servers. Each server is given, a portion of the stake. And as long as, 6 of those servers aren't taken over by hackers, at the same time, then that network is completely stable. When it comes to private versus permission, there's also a difference there. And in that scenario, you can imagine those 10 servers are operated by the same company. They offer maybe not the ability for anybody to sync up with their system, but they still offer public endpoints or private endpoints that require certain restrictions for accessing or querying that data or making transactions. So that's all sort of out of the box already. There's very small changes that need to be made for a full-on proof of authority verification system, using the same sort of Tendermint system. And it's just basically your authority is what's used as the weight instead of a token balance. That being said, actually, the use case that is maybe less compelling for those coming from the traditional crypto space, but the one that I'm in a way more excited about is a very permissioned and centralized system. So at the core of all of these projects, what I think is really exciting is that we're talking about building applications as deterministic state machines. And one of the features of running those deterministic state machines is having distributed networking and access to those state machines via proof of work or proof of stake or whatever it is. But one of the sort of, if you zoom out again, features that you get from just building applications as deterministic state machines with cryptographic guarantees about state hash and things like that, is that you can build an application which in almost every other way is indistinguishable from a traditional web server or an application, a game, except for the fact that it has money as a primitive built into it. So back to this idea of like building Ruby on Rails apps. I don't know if you had a similar experience to myself when I felt like I was a programming god. I could build any application when I like realized that through the help of this framework, it was actually pretty easy to design a full system, and you had full control over the application. You could really like build an app. For me, that was the first time that I felt like, wow, like I can build an app. My real sort of like goal with being involved in this project and working on specifically the Cosmos SDK is to give that same feeling to somebody, but with the idea that this app that I built now has money as a primitive. So you no longer need to have like a Stripe API system in which you're relying on this merchant service to honor your payments, to pay you at the end of the month, to accept payments on your behalf. It puts you in this system in which you have a little bit more overhead. You pay for that overhead. You also have a couple more trust assumptions. If you were able to build your app, your game or whatever, and just have money natively integrated into it, take the money directly from the user or let the user use their money directly inside your system, that's a really cool improvement on just building normal applications. Forget the idea of like creating censorship resistant applications or something like that, or ones that the government are trying to shut down. Just thinking about what is a real sort of small incremental improvement on the current software ecosystem as it exists in this world. It's providing people with a framework to build apps that have money as a primitive. And that opens up so many crazy possibilities for what can happen inside of an application. Of course, if your app has money inside of it, you should take much more seriously the operation of that application. And that's immediately when you need to start thinking about distributing the trust, distributing the operational responsibilities of running that application. And that's when you start looking towards, really making it fully decentralized, because you get, shared risk from that. It's not just all of your eggs in one basket. If one server gets compromised, the actual money, which is actual money at this point, goes out the window. And so I'm really a fan of starting with basically a centralized application. Build an app that somebody wants to use, make it cool, make it so that users actually come to you, and then as value starts being embedded in your system, then start worrying about distributing it and making sure that it's not going to go down, it's not going to get attacked. And as value accumulates in it, it also becomes more attractive to be a validator on that system. Because if people are actually using your app, you'll be able to make actual money transacting and operating these fees as a validator in the system, compared to, just running a validator for years on end because you believe in the project, but you're not actually making money in it. So I'm really a fan of focusing on the app itself and then working backwards to being a fully decentralized open public network. And the benefit of IBC is that you can use fully open public networks in your system without having to be one yourself from square one.
That's pretty cool. And yeah, I actually agree with this. But I think the focus in the last few years of many projects in the space was really to build the consensus layer and the networking layers of something completely new. And that took a lot of resource, a lot of time, of course, a lot of money. But I think we are now getting to a point where people start to focus on apps more. And I can really see this happening in DeFi. And there is also this kind of a comment that DeFi is not really DeFi at this point. It's quite centralized. And this really goes back to what you were saying. And I think this is like the right way of thinking, like create an app that users really want, that starts generating or attracting liquidity. Of course, make sure it's as secure as possible, but then try to kind of decentralize it by introducing a governance system mechanism. And I see this happening, for example, with Compound, Maker, Synthetics are also going in that direction. So I think it's like a part of the evolutionary process. And despite the fact that DeFi is not really centralized at this point, I think this is the end goal, and slowly we'll get there. And really just a final question, but maybe Anastasia, you wanted to say something, because
besides we have a question from the audience, if you would like, that
sure.
one like to be it's for there. I'll say that I love your philosophy with the ICO boom, just like almost 2 years ago. We saw that urge, to build something for the sake of building something, and then kind of you felt pressured into using it because otherwise, yeah, because we are the best or something like this. I like the opposite. You're actually solving a problem, and the other thing is that I also liked very much the philosophy of even if it's not us, even if it will continue working, even like without us or later, or yeah. So let's go back to the questions. So we have a question from Ludmila. Do the different blockchains have something like APIs that Cosmos uses in order to communicate between them? Or how do you deal with so many different and probably constantly changing APIs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that's constantly under discussion and work is being done on. Maybe it sounds like within that question, there's another one about exactly how, let's say, blockchains talk to each other. And I've been saying IBC over the time, but I think there's a real sort of missing piece in that description, which often clicks for people, and it's that I could walk through what like a transaction would actually look like. So if I'm a user and I have some atoms, let's say on the Cosmos Hub, and I want to send them to my mom's account on Binance Chain, let's say, or just to my own account on Binance Chain. Let's make it even simpler. What I would do is begin by creating a transfer application on the Cosmos Hub. And it's not just a standard transfer, it's an IBC transfer. So it says, I want to send 10 atoms to this address, which is my address, and on this chain, which is basically the registered ID for the Binance chain on the Cosmos Hub. So I send that transaction to the Tendermint validator set. It gets included in a block, and it, after getting included in a block, goes to the application where it gets processed. That process includes moving those 10 tokens out of my balance and putting them into an escrow account, plus triggering an event that says, this user just created a IBC, initialized an IBC transaction that has this much money that should go to that destination to that user. So that's at the end of the state. That block is completed, and the result is the fact that that event was emitted and that my money got locked up. So then you have this event, which has been heard around the world or whatever. It's been heard by myself probably on the whatever wallet that I use to initiate that event. Plus it's heard by a bunch of different relayers. So relayers are sort of independent third parties. They're either operating inside that app that I created my initial transaction from, or they're just like random people. It's a bit like on Ethereum, how you have the meta transaction relayer network. So these are like disinterested third parties who are just looking for outgoing transactions. When they hear that there's that event, they're able to take the information from that event, which includes, who I am, how much I want to send, who am I sending it to, where is that destination, plus all of the, the validator information, the headers of the application state and the consensus for that moment. So that's all the like metadata that's necessary to create the next transaction, which that relayer, or I will make that subsequent transaction from my wallet behind the scenes, will make to the actual Binance chain. So the first one is an actual transaction made by me to the Cosmos Hub. And the next one is made by anybody to the Binance chain, which includes the information from that event that originally came from my initial transaction. And that information includes all the proof, basically, that I really made that original transaction and I really want to send money to Binance. So then that relayer creates a new transaction that says part 2 of a transfer from this person with this proof to Binance. It gets included in the validator set of the Binance chain. It goes to their application state where it gets processed. And the is that 10 wrapped or 10 like Binance atoms are basically minted on behalf of that original user. And it goes to that recipient. Afterwards, basically the confirmation of that will go back to the Cosmos Hub, and those tokens will be finalized. That IBC transaction is done. The same thing basically happens in reverse. If after they get sold on the Binance exchange, somebody wants to redeem them for atoms, they come back, they say, I want to move these atoms, these like wrapped atoms back to my address on the Cosmos Hub. Somebody relays that back to Cosmos, and it unlocks those original atoms from that escrow account. And so those interactions mean that it's not like the Binance chain and Cosmos itself need to have like a WebSocket to each other, or that the actual application state has sort of like a connection. It's able to basically asynchronously create the evidence necessary for that information to be carried between those two projects. And the way those are carried between them is that both of those Tendermint clients, because they're both running Tendermint, have an RPC endpoint, which is just /tx, and that's where anybody can submit any transaction at any time. So that's the sort of like common and reliable API interface on both of those specifically Tendermint chains. But the general concept could be repeated across any type of network with any type of interface. Obviously, it's a lot easier if they just have Tendermint out the box, because you don't need to think about how does this network need its transaction encoded, what is its signature system, et cetera, like that. So that's like a description of, what are the interfaces currently. There's obviously a possibility for a lot of other types of interfaces to these different systems. Some of those interfaces are provided for querying state. Some of those interfaces are provided for querying the current, let's say round of validator system while they're confirming a transaction inside of a block. Some of those are very specific to applications, and that's where I think standards become really important. So if I, for instance, have a gaming blockchain and it uses the non-fungible token module, I'm going to provide an interface for querying on that, the same way that ERC 721 has common endpoints inside their contract. And so being able to detect what interfaces are available on a blockchain is where that sort of like ongoing conversation is right now. And the way it's looking at it right now that I see is having sort of common endpoints, which are basically introspection endpoints. So it's similar to the EIP 165, an endpoint on an SDK chain that says, okay, tell me everything I need to know about you. What modules do you have? What interfaces do you support? Do you support the NFT module? Can I query balances? What is it that I need to know about you? And the thinking about the results of those things are basically as a query response, getting a Swagger file that describes all of the different REST endpoints, all the different query abilities and things like that. In order to build, let's say, a wallet, which can seamlessly interact with a bunch of different chains that it doesn't have prior knowledge to, you would need a process of encoding the actual transactions. And they're currently going through a migration from a custom encoding system called Amino to using protobuf. And so with protobuf, which is this encoding standard built by Google a while ago, you have these .proto files, which describe the different transaction types and message types. And this is really similar to like an ABI file inside of an Ethereum contract. It basically tells you all of the type data that is necessary for you to know when crafting and signing transactions that go between these different blockchains. So that's the sort of work that's being done on that topic right now. There's ongoing conversations in the Cosmos community Discord. If you're interested in client libraries, especially, and making sure that as a client-side developer, you have a coherent developer experience, while in the middle of this migration to protobuf is a great time to put in your opinion or to offer your expertise on that. If that's a topic that's interesting to you, I fully encourage you to jump in on that conversation.
Wow, okay, that was very specific. I hope there are a lot of developers here and they find this very interesting and they look into Cosmos. And just one final question with a quick answer, like what has already launched in the Cosmos ecosystem and what remains to launch there? Like you mentioned that we are looking forward to the IBC launching. So when should we? Yeah,
IBC is really the key that unlocks this whole vision. Right now, we have a bunch of independent blockchains, which were either built with the Cosmos SDK or other Tendermint-based architecture, which are using, some of them are using, peg zones to relay information back and forth. Some of them have trusted bridges between them. BINANCE has set up a few different trusted bridges, like with the Loom network and things like that. And those have, they're not that perfect scenario because that perfect scenario doesn't exist without IBC. Again, sort of going back to this level of integrity of engineering, we've wanted to only provide what we're 100% sure of to a public network, which is why IBC has gone through such sort of rigorous steps in the testing and rollout. And so that's what our sort of next phase is this game of zones adversarial test network before being included in the actual Cosmos Hub. As a protocol, it is, decentralized. And if a network wants to include it and start running it on their mainnet before, say, the Cosmos Hub does, they're welcome to do that. They there's nothing that guarantees the Cosmos Hub is going to be the first user of IBC. It's just that there's a lot of sort of commonality in the engineering mind share with that network. But for instance, the sort of next steps that I'm really excited about are just the final implementation of IBC in Golang, specifically for the Cosmos SDK. Next steps would be IBC in different languages. I'm really excited to see IBC in Substrate, for example. I think that the architectural decisions and features of Polkadot, have their benefits. The sort of choices I'm more excited about are these sort of more open and access ones. But at the same time, Substrate is this really, world-class framework for building state machines. Nothing about Substrate requires you to use the Polkadot hub at the same time. So there's projects like Oscoin Radical, who are building with Substrate and are going to be using it with proof of work. They're not planning on having these sorts of like rent paying slots inside of the Cosmos hub, as far as I know. The Polkadot network, but they can still benefit from using IBC in different ways, or other users of Substrate who probably won't have as hard of a time because they're not using proof of work in their consensus. But getting IBC in as many sort of software development kits and as many sort of spaces and as many different networks so that it can be used and we really can sort of connect all these different siloed blockchains through a network. Besides that, I'm really excited about Ethermint, you mentioned before. So Ethermint is two things. It's a module for the Cosmos SDK, which is basically an extension of Geth that allows you to run an Ethereum virtual machine on a Cosmos SDK chain. So that means that if you want to have something like a Ethereum clone, you can allow users to deploy to the EVM while still having sort of like a supra blockchain on top of it, which is using the Tendermint validator set, which still also accepts and processes like normal Cosmos style messages and transactions like transfer or governance proposals and things like that, but offers basically a miniature state machine inside of that state machine, which runs Solidity code and things like that. So it's a module, so you could actually build your own blockchain that has the EVM in case you want to redeploy your Solidity, but you don't want to have the same restrictions on the actual environment. But it's also a zone that's being worked on by ChainSafe. And so they're working closely with Aragon. I'm not sure if the current plan right now is for Aragon to be on the Ethermint chain or for Aragon to have a parallel Ethermint chain. But I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities that open up with sort of production version of Ethermint. Ethermint is currently available and ready to use. But the sort of next iteration on it will be really battle testing it and bringing it up to production level. The other sort of really exciting piece is Peggy, which is the open source EVM peg zone module. And so this is the sort of system that uses the same security assumptions as the Tendermint validator set. So the token stake and the voting power that is given to you as a validator in a Tendermint set can be used to give you authority to be an oracle who does those token transfers or data transfers between like Ethereum mainnet or another EVM probabilistic chain and a Cosmos SDK chain. And the project who's taken over development on that is called Althea. They're a really cool project who's been running a mainnet for a while now using the SDK as well as XDAI chain. And they are a internet service provider, mesh network. They are basically a peer-to-peer service provider so that in rural areas across America and Africa that you can sell your uplink to people in your vicinity using satellites. So you actually physically relay internet access, and then you have payments done and stable token with sort of instant confirmation and no merchant fees. So even that, you know what I mean? Like there's nothing that requires a blockchain for that. They could be using Venmo to make all these payments between service providers and internet users. But the fact that they have money as a primitive inside that stack means that they're not beholden to a merchant service or having to pay the fees to a merchant service, which end up being much higher than the minimal fees of actually just operating a network.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting, quite detailed. Again, do you have any ETAs or it's not clear when some of these things will be out. They are currently being worked on, but do you expect them to appear by the end of the year or after that?
Yeah, I mean, so Game of Zones is starting on May 1st. I think it's meant to run 3 months. And at the end of the Game of Zones, you would expect the proposal to go to the Cosmos Hub to use IBC from there. So it could be as early as 3 months. It might be that because of Game of Zones, there's other things that people want to try. I mentioned that there's a lot of this upgrade to using protobuf. So there's a lot of other sort of features that are coming out specifically in the Cosmos SDK that might require more time for audits just to be completely secure on. I'm always hesitant to give any sort of time or dates because they're never right. I don't know a single engineer who's good at doing that, no matter if it's a crypto project or not. So soon, trademark is the official answer.
Okay, perfect.
We just have one last question. Actually, it's again from Ludmila. It's a follow-up question.
That will be the last one because we're really over time.
It's really the last. It was very much on time. It just we never got to it. So she's asking whether we have thought of connecting blockchains with decentralized or centralized databases so that you could also store data and at the same time transact info through the blockchains.
Yeah. So this is depending on exactly the architecture you're describing. What I mean when I say I'm excited about like deterministic state machines, like if there are sort of guarantees about the integrity of data, then it can by native, interact with IBC and other deterministic state machines. If it's about sort of offering access to asynchronous data, like in maybe a more traditional database, then it sounds like you're describing what I've been seeing with stuff like the Thailand National ID Program, who's used Tendermint to build a system. And specifically with IDs, you need to be really careful about what data is on chain and what data is off chain. And so they have basically built a blockchain, which is kind of a authority permission system that points to who has access and who is allowed to access different off-chain data sets. So something like a traditional MySQL database that might have medical records, might have ID information, might have your driver's information or something like that, would be guarded and controlled by different like data operators. And those data operators would be sort of registered on a blockchain, and their permissions would be part of that deterministic state machine. And they would be sort of providing access to those things. So it depends on the use case, of course, like if it's about, just say gatekeeping to access to those different data points, or if it's about being like an oracle to those different sort of data assets. But I think it's probably too specific to the application to make some sort of a blanket statement about that question, but I very much appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for answering all the questions. And sorry, we took more of your time than expected, but people that's great that we have questions.
Great questions. Thanks very much for all of them.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Billy, for this. I think it was super informative, and you provided so much information for so many different projects, like directly or indirectly connected to the Cosmos ecosystem. Obviously, you have been in the blockchain space for a very long time, and that's the kind of people that we would like to see more in our meetups. So thank you very much for joining once again. And I guess see you around in Berlin when I come most definitely there. Thank you very much. And guys, this is the end of Sofia Crypto Meetup number 48. We will share some questions about what you would like to see next month. I will be announcing this link to the Bitcoin halving party next month, expected around May 12th. And meanwhile, while we were just talking about blockchain and applications, the price of Bitcoin went up with further, I think, $300. So it's almost $1,000 for the day for Bitcoin gains. This is really what we have seen this in Bitcoin. I wasn't expecting it, but there we go. So I hope at least you guys are happy with the content we provided, and hopefully you're happy with the Bitcoin price. See you next see you next month. At the end, we will decide on the topic later. And yeah, Anastasia, if you have something to say, now is the time.
I just wanna, we already are very much ahead with time. I just wanna thank everyone. I hope it was. It was super interesting and full of information. Also, as you said, learned not only about Cosmos, a bunch of other amazing projects. I have a whole list here now to check them out. So yeah, stay tuned. We're getting back to with really cool stuff again. Bye, everyone.
Okay, guys, so I'm going to officially stop the live stream now. And thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks so much, you guys. Bye.
Thank you very much, Billy. Personally, I was serious.